Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a special episode. We're doing a beginner class and this one's all about supporting the base. Yep, it's all about that base. Whether you're working on a 32 millimeter base, 25 millimeter base, 50, 60, 40, 100, whatever size you've got, this will help you. I think this will pertain to just about anybody. Now, there's a channel we follow and we love a lot, Table Flip Foundry. You can check them out. They actually do a beginner class on something called the double row method. I'm going to mention that a few times in this video because I took a lot of that particular style and I've kind of adapted it a little bit. And I don't want to say improved it, but we did change it. And my method works pretty good. But anyway, I do like to give a shout out to them because we did, they inspired us to do what we do, and we appreciate them. Thanks, guys. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the other objects on the build plate here because I want to focus on just one of these little guys. And this is a 32 millimeter base we're going to start with. And they're not super huge, but it's big enough that I've heard a lot of people have issues, these things just popping off. The pre-supporting doesn't work, etc. As usual, we're going to do an angle. I go greater than 45 degrees. On this particular build plate, I'm going to go about 54.1. That's the sweet spot. Doesn't have to be there, but that is definitely the sweet spot for this particular build. So that's where we're going to go. Once you get the orientation where you want it, don't forget to lift the object a little bit as well. And if you don't lift it here, you can still lift it on the Prepare tab by going to your Prepare and then Support. And under Support, all the way on the right, you're going to find a Utilities tool that will allow you to raise the object off of the build plate. I usually recommend between, let's say, 3 and 5 millimeters off. Gives the support bars enough room to grow and to make them a decent size so they can be strong enough to do some actual supporting. Don't forget your raft, whatever type you want to use. I prefer the line diagram triangle, I believe it's called, line support triangle. And then if you want to use the mirroring, the XY mirroring, that works really well on symmetrical bases. I'm going to start with a medium. That is a 0.33, a 3.33, and a 1.33. You can see it right there on the right-hand side if you forget. And that's what I'm going to use to start with. That's going to be the majority of our initial row on the bottom. And again, like I said, I'm going to mention the double row method a few times because we do use it to an extent. I'm going to use the exact same style of supporting tips, etc., but I use some similar ones, but we do use a similar method to the double row method. And with the XY mirroring turned on, you can actually make a pretty quick turnaround on bases, and they should be relatively simple for you to finish. So stay tuned. If you make it through this whole video, you're going to learn how to support everything from a gigantic base to a small base to a hollowed out piece that is a base. Yes, it is about an hour, so stick with us. I promise it's worth it. Alright, so when you want to go ahead and start your row, and I put 2 in the back to start with and 1 in the dead center, I'm going to go ahead and put 2 right around those and try to get them as close to each other as possible so there's a little bit of overlap where the supports sit next to each other, and the tips and the not the tips, but the ends of the bar rather, where they touch the build plate or the raft, are going to be connected, fused together. The reason for this is it creates a very good bonding point. It's a great strength anchor, so you don't actually have to create too many anchors themselves. This will kind of become the anchor. Now this is a tapered design, so this isn't as bad as some where you have a very large chunk of material in the middle. In those cases, Even for a small one, I'd probably hollow it out and just chunk out the middle and almost do this kind of thing myself, but a little more rudimentary where it's not so smooth on the bottom. Unfortunately, that approach creates islands, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to that later. As you can see, I'm creating this row pretty close to each other, but as I move up and away from the starting point, I start to spread out just a little bit at a time. And each new level of support gets a little bit further away from each other than the last level until we have a decent gap between the supports. And then I'll get closer to each other when we come around a corner, and then we can spread out a little bit as we get to the top. And yes, I know there's a gap there. We'll fill that in a moment. But you can see there, you have a pretty solid uniform support ring that's covering the bottom of your base. And of course, doing the XY mirroring makes a short job of this because you can go around and you get it done on both sides in one go. And for the most part, if the base is uniform and nice and symmetrical, you're going to have a really easy time with that. Now, the reason I brought up the double row method and the reason I keep mentioning is because we're going to go ahead and add a second row of supports right above where the first one started. And the reason we want to do this is we want to reinforce your starting point. Because bases can tend to be a little heavy, they can tend to have decent surface areas as they build. You want to have a nice point at the bottom that's going to be like your tension point that's going to be able to pull back all the other force against the FEP, so your build plate can win that competition. So you want to place the second row fairly on top of the first one, but not to the point where the tips are on top of each other. You want to make sure the tip is a little bit further away, but the actual bar and the end of the bar that's touching the raft is going to be slightly fused to the row behind it. And the reason for this is because you want to create some really strong adhesion points there. So again, you want to try and get towards the middle, and you want to start as close to the center as possible. And you can turn off the mirroring if you want to place that first support in the dead center, and then you can kind of go from there. But I usually, what I'll try to do is I'll try to get either in the middle, or I'll try to place two supports really close to each other, as close as I can get, so they're almost touching, and then I'll start from there, and then kind of move your way out. Now, with the second row, as you do this, you're going to kind of lessen the amount of tension almost immediately, and you're going to spread them out much sooner than you did the first row. And the reason for this is because with a base this small, you don't need to ultra step up the heavy supporting at the very bottom. A 32 millimeter, 25 millimeter, 40 millimeter base is going to print off with ease with this level of supporting, no problem. And what we do in the middle of it, you're going to see, is going to actually solidify that. And normally I would use the XY mirroring for all of it, but I'm going to demonstrate in a different way to do it in just a moment. And we're going to demonstrate how to do it every single way, so don't worry. If there's a particular method you're waiting for, it'll be later on in the video. In this case, we're going to start using lights on the back, and that's a sub-light medium. So this is a little bit heavier than my normal light. It's a 0.25, 3.25, and a 1.25. You can see over there on the right-hand side what that looks like if you need visual reference. But you know what? We're not going to do it like that, because the newer versions of Lychee have included inline support. And I know what you're thinking, this isn't square. But I'm going to show you how inline supports can be used on objects that aren't square. And I think I've actually demonstrated this a few times, but I really love using this now. And it may even look a little wonky at first. And you're probably going to go, I don't know, that doesn't look right. Give it a chance. You'll see that this is actually a pretty good way to do it. And yes, I know I could just go and decrease my interval, which we'll get to later, because I didn't actually think of that at first, so let me just go with the flow here. Now what you do is you're going to create lines based on interval, and based on the inline support, you're just going to go ahead and create your lines. And you can angle them in a little bit if you want to. Your fulcrum there is going to be the very, very tip of the base where it starts. So, I mean, it's not going to be totally a bad thing to have them kind of angled towards it if you wanted to. Now, you don't have to. You can even angle away from them if you wanted to pull away from the center. Again, you're going to be fighting a bigger fight there. So, not necessarily the best way to do it, but having a balance is going to work out, and you'll see why I have that one row that's kind of like cockeyed as well, because we're gonna add some other supports in the middle anyway. So now you have your basic little jumble. So we're going to go ahead and remove some of the supports in between, and we're not going to remove all of them. We're just going to remove one, skip one, remove, skip a few, etc. And we'll keep going down the road until we have a little bit less of a mess down here at the bottom, because there's too many. We don't need that many supports, not on a little tiny base like that. So we'll just keep removing some until we get a healthier number down here. And then we're going to go in and kind of plug in a few in between to fill in the spaces that we need to fill in. And again, we're using the sublight medium, and this is 0.25, 3.25, and a 1.25 diameter on the bar. Again, you can see the settings right there on the right-hand side in my support menu as I'm working on this. So feel free to write that down. The other settings for the medium were a 0.33, a 3.33, and a 1.33. Again, the numbers actually match for a reason mathematically. So the reason I use supports of those particular types is because that is what works. That is what has the best success ratios for different shapes, sizes, and types of material that I work with. And that is why I particularly use those numbers. So if you usually see me change a number, the numbers usually will coincide with each other. And occasionally they'll have a slightly different tip length or something like that, but that usually is at a little bit of a risk when you do see that. So there we have the bottom. A little non-uniform, but for the most part that actually looks pretty decent. It's very, just a little clustered here and there, but I mean for the most part that's a pretty solid supporting that's going to go around the bottom. We add some bracings to it, strengthen that up a little bit. And now the last thing you want to do is probably just paint on a few supports on the front where you have some yellow on that little bit of an overhang where the material is kind of going to jut out from the base. And of course we can use our layer slider to kind of preview what that's going to look like as it builds. And I'm going to demonstrate what I've done, which is now what I call the third row or 3-row method. And this front area is now going to become our third row, because we're going to put a third row of supports. That's not going to go around the entire base, but it is going to go around the front, because we want to support the yellow zone in the very front of the base. So whereas the back side of these are being supported by mediums with a 0.33, the front is being supported by a light with a 0.22, a 1.22, and a 3.25 tip length. The reason I want to do this, and I'm going to strength in this concept is because there's that entire section of yellow right there in the front. There's going to be a lot of pull there in the initial stages of the print, offering it some additional assistance by securing some more lights in the front by creating the third row, as I talked about it, which really isn't a full row, creates enough additional pull back that you're going to have a much better shape to the front of your base, to the starting point of your base, whatever side this is that's facing down. So do I think it's absolutely necessary? Yes, if you want a good looking base. Will your base fail without that? No. It's not going to have the best starting point, unfortunately, because of the fact that it's going to miss an area that's going to have a lot of peel back, or peel force, whatever you want to call that. And so I think, unfortunately, because of that, you're going to wind up with either issues of a little bit of a pancake or warping issue right there at the very edge, and that's going to ruin the first bit of your base. So if you want a perfect base, if you want it to come out really good, take my advice on this and add this little extra third row in the front. It's not exactly going to be a full row. You're just going to put it right there in the very edge of the lip, and that's going to be enough to make sure that the base prints off really clean off the first side, or the first couple slices rather, and keeps going straight up in a good manner. Now again, this one's pretty much done. We're just going to stick a few extra ones on the yellow bits, anything that's got some yellow in it. Unless it's super, super, super tiny, then I'm not really overly concerned. And then we'll do the islands on it, which it has a 1, not a big deal. And we're done with this 32 millimeter little base. So this is, again, a 32 millimeter. You can use this technique on a 32, a 25, a 40. Once you get into bigger than that, 50, 60, there's a few deviations, like I might use a few heavies on the center, or not heavies, mediums on the center, versus this one where we use nothing but lights in the center of the base. So do keep that in mind. That's a 50 millimeter base there. And the next one I'm going to show you is a 60 millimeter base. And again, the orientation would be virtually the same. You'd want to put them, at this particular printer, I'm going to put them around a 54.1 degree angle. And no reason to hollow these, they're too small. They don't have any protrusions either. There's nothing sticking out of them. There's no big objects or anything like that hanging off. So they're not really an issue. But let's look at a 100 millimeter base. We'll get back to those ones in a minute. Now, 100 millimeter base, you'd think, all right, we could hollow this. But let me show you why hollowing this isn't such a great idea. There's not a whole lot of space in there. It looks like it is, but it's not. So there's like very little space between the actual hollowed area and what you're going to see on top. So it's still going to pull a lot of material, I would say unnecessary, not an unnecessary amount of material, but it's going to pull additional material, and the hollowing isn't really going to do much for you. It's actually going to create islands because it's going to give you textures on the bottom that you don't normally have. Now for this one, we're using mediums, and we're gonna do a more than a double row. This is probably gonna be a 3 row. And this is gonna be a 0.44, a 3.44, and a 1.44. And again, you can see the settings up there in the upper right-hand corner. And we're gonna probably, of course, reinforce this with our additional row in the front. Because once again, if you look at that little rim there, we've got a yellow zone that we're seeing. And we definitely want to make sure that we use this little pincer maneuver to hold these areas together And again, use your XY mirroring on stuff like this, because if it's symmetrical and round or square, you can totally get away with it, and this will save you oodles of time. So now we're going to move down just a little bit further, because that first row is a little bit further up, and we're going to move down a little bit. And we're going to go closer to the edge, and we're just going to put one support down, one support down, one support down, and keep moving our way around until we have created a decent ring. Now, again, this is probably going to be about, I would say, 3 to 4 rows on the inside with an additional row on the outside there. And that row on the outside on this is absolutely necessary, because you'll see it's actually forming on both sides at the same time. So you need the front and back support there on that edge, so it catches all of that when it's starting to form its first couple of layers there. And that's going to give you good adhesion. So I think it's important to note that absolutely necessary to have that extra row in the front. In this particular case, that will make this possible as far as a good build. So I don't think it's overkill. I think it's actually going to work great in this particular sense. Now again, this is a big one, so we'll try to move through this as quickly as possible. And then we're going to move back to the 50 and 60 millimeter bases, and I'll go over that technique with you. And we'll try to cover them all. So this is going to be a pretty in-depth look at how we do each size. Now, so far, the major difference is you've got more space to work with. So as you can see here, I'm actually doing a double setup here as I go along. So I'm doing one on the outside, one on the inside. We're trying to gauge exactly how much space that we need. So as I move up, I'm kind of moving across. And we can see that it's a decent amount of space between those two supports. There's even some room maybe in between for some smaller supports to sit there, or even some medium size that are going to sit there as well. So again, decent amount of space that is going to be in between the first and second row there as you move up. So this is really going to be a 3 rows on the inside, 1 row on the outside, possibly 2 rows even up towards the top there where you have that one yellowed area on the upper quadrant. But let's go ahead and finish the outer row first, because I'm kind of working sideways here. So we'll do that. We'll just finish the outer row first, get all the way to the top, and then we'll start to move towards the inner rows as well. And you notice some of these I'm making kind of more dense at the top, less dense. I'm going to go back and kind of flesh that out where I've kind of filled in a little too much or not enough. Again, just like we did with the smaller one, once you get the outer row done, you want to go ahead and build up your inner row. Now, we already started doing this already, so we have a little advantage there. We can just finish out the inner rows, and then, of course, let's also do a little double row here on this yellow zone to strengthen this area and make sure that it has enough support too, and then just kind of fill in the top area here with as much support as we can fit. And again, we're going to use inline supports, but I think, as I said before, I'm going to mess with the interval a little bit to actually see if we can get it to go at an interval that I think will be a little bit better. And because this is big, and I think I mentioned this on the other one, you are not totally insane if you have your supports going at an inward angle, because the peel force is going to start at the center middle of the print where you have that print starting. So I think it's important to still note that that's where most of your peel force is going to start from. And I think having the print, having reinforcement in that area is actually not a bad idea. And you'll see the way I do this with these, by the way. And I set the interval to 6 millimeters apart. And that actually seems to be a pretty good distance to get me a decent amount of supports without overcrowding each interval line. So not a bad way to do it. And again, this should save you some serious amounts of time as well. Inline supporting is fantastic. And I know some people are like, but it's only for square stuff. It's not. You can use it on anything flat. I mean, I don't advise using it on curves too much, although I do occasionally just to see what it'll do because I love to experiment with it. And every once in a while, it'll actually do some funky things. And I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. That's actually useful. I mean, it sort of puts supports in places where I'm like, all right, well, I wouldn't even, I mean, that actually took a couple of steps out of my hands. I don't have to put that there now, so not too bad. And what we'll do here is we'll just finish up and add rows on the other side. And again, we'll try to be as clean with this as possible. Try to keep this organized. Want to make sure that it looks nice and uniform. Because again, keep in mind, the more uniform, I know I can be a little chaotic sometimes. You keep the uniformity solid when you're working with a symmetrical object, you're going to have a better chance of it being symmetrical when it prints. So do keep that in mind. It's this uniformity and balance in your supports, I think, makes a big difference when it comes to the way the actual object will print. So keep that in mind. It's not just aesthetics. You don't want just your supports to look pretty. You want them to actually be functional. So there's your support web on the bottom. And this is a combo when we're using a 0.33 tip, but I'm still using the 3.44 and a 1.44. And then we'll add some bracings to those. And then we'll bring back all the supports so you guys can see what everything looks like. And this massive 100 millimeter base is pretty much supported. And of course, like any object, you want to make sure that you cover all the yellow spots too. So don't forget to double check all that. Any place that's an overhang or anything like that that has any yellow zones would be definitely a high pressure area. So make sure just to add some light supports around the edge. Alright, so we covered a 32mm base and we just went over a 100mm base. So let's go back to a 50 and a 60 and then we'll cover something a bit different. Okay, and just like everything before, orientation is always going to have to be the first step. Now, no different than anything else, we're going to go ahead and just put these at a rotation and put them about around 54 degrees. That should be good enough for pretty much any object that's just has a flat back or, something like a round base or something like this. And for some reason, one of these is a little bit lower than the other one, so I'm going to go ahead and raise the other one and try to match the height so they're both around the same height. And just like all the other ones, go ahead and turn on your mirroring for them both to give you a very quick way of doing it. And we're going to use the double row method on each one of these bases. And of course, I'm going to add my third row in the front as well, and the upper supporting rows, because these are concave bases on the back, which make it a little different. When they're just smooth and flat on the bottom, it's actually a little bit easier. You don't have that little dip up there. But when they do them like this, you have that little concave area, and you kind of have to focus on that. So we're going to use the 0.33, the 3.33, and the 1.33. So be sure to check out the support setup on the side there as I work, because it will display obviously what I'm using for each area. And this first one we're working on, I believe that's the 50mm one that I'm doing there on this particular side, and the other one next to it's the 60mm. So we'll get to both of those here, and you'll be able to see how we support both of those. Now again, the workflow here is pretty much the same. You're going to create your outer row, then you're going to go back, you're going to create your inner row, then you're going to go ahead and put in your supporting in the middle, and then you're going to do your bracings, and then you're going to check your islands. That point, it's good to go, as long as you've supported the yellow zones and you check your layer slider to make sure that you don't have anything that is going to be missed or overlapped too much on the bottom, where you're going to miss something or it's going to warp. And that's it, and you're good to go. So usually bases are pretty simple. So once you get your first row, go ahead and add your second row and repeat the process, and we'll come back with some more dialogue here once we get started on the main event, which we'll get to in a bit. Alright, so we finished up the 50 millimeter base, and this video is going on very long as it is, so I'm going to go ahead and skip doing the 60 millimeter base because I would literally do it the exact same way. Now here's the one we've been waiting on doing, and this is the Mummy Dragon base. This is a huge piece. It's already, I believe, about 70 plus millimeters wide. And it's got this giant chunk of material that sticks off the top, and it's also got bits that kind of hang off the edge. You've got overhang, you've got all sorts of fun stuff. And it took me a minute to find a great orientation for it. Once I did, I was good there. But then I decided, I said, you know what, this needs to be hollowed. Now, the original creators of the piece, Cripple God Foundry, they did actually have a hollowed version that was pre-supported, so salute them, because not a lot of companies do that. When it comes to big parts, they offer this one hollowed, and it was pre-supported hollowed, so that was great. But what I'm demonstrating here is the way that I hollow things, because I do it a little bit differently. I don't actually use Lychee's native hollowing to do the whole process throughout the entire process, because that creates some problems of its own. So I actually will bring the model in, and I think I've gone over this a few times, but we're going to go over it now again. I will bring the model in, I will go to the Prepare tab, I will go over to hollowing, I will choose my specified thickness, and I will change the quality level to 4. The reason I use 4 all the time is because it gives you the most available space on the inside. And yeah, it creates weird over bumps and stuff like that sometimes, but it works. Then I will create a giant hole at the bottom as big as possible, removing as much material and preventing anything, any supports or uncured material from getting stuck in there. This also prevents suction. If you have a giant hole in the bottom, you don't have anything to worry about as far as suction. It's going to be great. Now, keep in mind you have to punch in far enough. So we did a 1.6 millimeter thickness on the wall, so you have to punch in at least 1.6 millimeters. And sometimes, depending on the way the base is made or the way the model and mesh is made, you have to punch a little bit further than that, and otherwise it won't work. I've seen a few models where they get glitchy when you don't. It's like you have to punch past where the pieces were merged in some cases. So once you punch your hole, then you're going to go ahead and go over to the Export tab in Lychee, and then you're going to export that as an STL. And don't save it over the original. Save it as something else. You always want to keep your original STL file because you never know if you want to go back and try and do it the other way around. In this particular case, I don't think I would ever print this base solid because it's in my opinion, is far too much material for a base, and it's such a waste to put that much material on a base. It's not going to make it any less useful as a base. It's still going to be able to hold the character on a stable platform. It's just not going to be nearly as heavy, and it's not going to use nearly as much material, and it's also going to go way easier on your FEP and your printer. So again, when you're done, you're going to go to your export. You're going to go to your export as STL down there in the bottom. And you want to make sure that it exports the holes. And then once you have that exported, then you can go ahead and open up a new scene or the same scene or what have you, and you can re-import the model that has already got the holes in it. The reason I do this is because this particular way of doing it makes sure that Lychee actually pays attention to the holes. If you use this hollowing method and you don't actually pay attention or you don't use that method, when Lychee puts supports down and the hole gets in the way, it will just delete the support. And some people they're not conscious enough of that, or they just don't pay attention. They're like, oh, what is that? Yeah. So there's the example of the model that has been hollowed versus the one that has not. So you can see the cross section of what's going to be printing per slice, and just that slice right there should tell you which one is going to have a much easier time printing. So the way we support this is actually going to be a little different because 3 reasons. 1, I can't use the XY mirroring because it's not a fully symmetrical item, and it's also not an XYZ tilted axis. It's actually tilted in 2 axes, or actually it might be tilted in all 3 axes if I check. And so you can't really use any of those. It just doesn't work. So we're going to actually wind up doing a lot of support painting, where you can use some inline tools, and we're just going to use some manual support additions. And of course, I'm also going to go over how to add supports on the interior of the model versus the way you do it if you did your hollowing natively in Lychee. And that would be using the layer slider to see the inside of the model and kind of place supports as you go up. And we'll go over that as we get to those areas in the model. Alright, we only need one of these guys, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of one, move this one off to the side a little bit, and just make sure that we have it in a decent position so we can go ahead and start supporting it. Now, the objective here is obviously, we're going to start with islands because this is a bit different than the other ones, and the other ones I kind of did islands last. So in this case, we're going to start with islands, and with the magical power of video editing, we're going to skip having you deal with them at all. And actually, I'm even going to skip having to even watch you guys apply the 64 islands that need to be applied here, but I'm going to point out the fact that hollowing does in fact create islands where there may have been none. And that's one of the things that you will find. You will have less material, but you are going to find that it creates islands because it creates texture on the inside, on the other side, where there used to just be a smooth surface. Alright, so now that we've got the islands all supported, and yeah, I know editing makes it look easy. Essentially, guys, you can use the add all support islands function if you want, or you can go and just click one by one. Or you can use the tool to go one by one and use the plus sign to add the support of the designated size. Now, so far, all the islands I've supported here are going to be supported in my light, typical light, 22 tip diameter, 325 for the tip length, and a 122 for the diameter of the bar. Now, it seems kind of small for a base this large, but because it is hollow, it does not require a lot of excess strength. It does not require super thick supports. It does not require mediums or heavies, really. Although I will apply a couple of mediums to the outer frame on the bottom just to give it a little extra support. And like I was saying, you can't really use the X, Y, or Z mirroring on this. It's not sitting at an appropriate angle for any of that to really work to your advantage at all, unfortunately. But you could probably find a way to make use of that, like you could re-export it as one particular angle and then re-import it so that way that is actually the XY angle. So as you can see here, what we can do is we can create our own rows, and we're going to double it up a little bit there. So we have one in the front, one in the back, and immediately we're creating like a little crisscross pattern with our supports. Now, because this has got a wide lip, you've got plenty of room to add supports there at the bottom. And I want you to make sure to note this, that even though this is hollow, this outer frame needs to survive more than anything else, because this outer frame is the most important thing. This is going to hold the shape of the entire object. Because it is hollow, this is the most important aspect as far as strength. This is going to define the shape of the bottom, and so making sure that this is nice and solid, nice and strong, and using these light supports in a clustered pattern like this is going to ensure that you have a very good, clean, easy to remove support on this hollowed portion on the bottom. And so we'll work our way up, and I'll kind of explain how each step differs, but as you can see, since we're only working with lights, even these clusters down here still have a hard time kind of fusing together. They're still even separated enough there. And we'll go ahead and add supports to pretty much any yellow zone. We're going to add supports to the interior, and we're just going to continue to add supports around the outside edge. You could use the support painter if you wanted to. You could go about it that way. That is one way you can do it if you feel that you're accurate enough to do so. I'm pretty good with the support painter, but I feel like my accuracy with the mouse is a little bit better when I'm just going point and click. And so I prefer doing it that way if I'm trying to get the workload done a little faster. Now I will speed this one up a little bit so that way you guys don't have to sit through the monstrosity that was supporting this particular piece in its entirety, as that in itself would have been a 30-minute video. So we'll try to wrap this one up a little bit and get through this supporting as quickly as we can and try to make this at least viewer friendly for you. Now once you've added your first set of bracings and you've got your two outer circles pretty much made there, and again this is similar to the double row method, but it's a little bit more sporadic because you've got some spacing there on the inside and the outside. The front lip is a little bit wider. The back lip is a little bit thicker in some parts because of the way the hollowing punched that out. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the inside in some of these areas, and we can turn off the supports on the outside if we need to. That will help us get a better look. And of course, we can also use the layer slider to give a good look at what's going on the inside as well, as I think it's important to kind of maintain an understanding that you still need to support the inside too, because that could collapse and then you're going to have problems. So want to make sure that you definitely look at the inside of your model when you do hollowing and look for any yellow areas, just like we do on the outside. And as you can see, as you go up with the layer slider, we've got some zones in here that we need to support. Now, the easy way to do it, just get your support painter, go ahead and just go in there, just click, hold down the mouse button and support paint over those areas. You can turn on your interval and you can have it switch between light, medium, etc. based on intervals. And you can set all that up in your presets underneath your manual menu under support painting. There's a way to do all that down there. Now I have that turned off. You can have it on internal interval or preset. Right now I just have it on standard, so I just choose the pressure of the support and then I just go ahead and paint them in. And this is a great and fast way to get supports in to little tight areas where you want to just paint them in real quick rather than having to go and click, 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 click. And now again, not for accuracy, it's just great for quickness. And you can even then go ahead and make them a little bit bigger if you want to afterwards just by changing the type of support. And as we kind of look up and down, there's not a whole lot on the inside there. We're going to be able to see most of it from the bottom, so that's going to be handy anyway. We'll do some inline supporting here on the sides where we have some square kind of sloping areas. That will help make a short job of some of this, and we'll give it adequate support. Again, not using anything larger than a 0.22 tip on a majority of this stuff, with the few exceptions of maybe 1 or 2 mediums on some of the internal supports and a couple mediums we just did there on those mini supports in that one little tunnel area to make sure that that's nice and strong. Again, don't be afraid to use Support Painter to pepper on supports wherever you need them. It's a very quick way to add supporting to areas, and although again, not as accurate as it could be, if you learn to get in there and really kind of steady the hand a little bit and draw them in, you can get a little accuracy in there, and it's a great way to get a lot of supports drawn in very quickly. I really do love the tool. It's a great addition to the software. Okay, the last stage of the hollow base is going to be painting all the material on the inside with supports. So your best bet there is just kind of start from one corner, or in this case we'll start in the middle because there's this big kind of square patch, and we can use some inline there to get in the geometry that's like more rectangular. And then I'm just going to start painting like a madman around all these yellow zones, letting the supports paint in where the interval will allow them based on distance. And I also have them avoiding every other support. So they will avoid other supports, and they will try to maintain a distance of 2.2 millimeters to each other, as well as other supports that they're near. And as you can see, just that painting right there, we filled in a decent amount of it. Go ahead and add bracings to that. And then I'll go ahead and paint in the top area just to fill that area in. And then once we're finished there, you just release the mouse button once you're done painting, and it will go ahead and then display and render all the supports that you have created in that paint session. And then go ahead and just manually add the ones that you want to add in between, because the support painter is not perfect. It's a little slow sometimes to catch up, so it won't always place a support when you want it to. So sometimes I will go back and just have to kind of do manuals kind of where I need to add the little extra bits here and there. And that's almost it. We're going to do a couple minor modifications, add a few more supports around the outside where there's some yellow zones, and then we're going to run the slice on this one. As always, with a big piece or any print in general, don't forget to start your layer slider tests and checks. If you don't use UV tools and you do it by hand, this is definitely a good way to do it. Lychee's layer slider is a fantastic way of getting a good look at what's actually coming down the pipeline as your printer sees it. You'll get to see what the slice looks like, both on the top and on the bottom, and this will allow you to add or take away supports where you feel like it is absolutely necessary or unnecessary to have the additional supporting. Now here in the front, I've added some more supports there in the very front to give it a little extra balance. Other than that, I think it's actually going to have a really easy time building. Because it's hollow and because it is such less material than the solid versions, it's not going to pull as much. It's got one little island section there in the front that's going to be maybe a little bit of an issue if we don't support it well enough, but as you can see, it is being supported as it builds its way up. Now we of course can say, all right, maybe we want to look at adding to that if we want to, but of course those are things that you can think about as you kind of go layer by layer. Now depending on how big your print is, this could take you a little bit of time, but trust me, even if it means you have to go 3,000 slices, it is worth it to see exactly where you are in the sense of layer by layer and slice by slice, to kind of get an idea of, okay, maybe this layer needs a little bit more help. Maybe this slice isn't getting supported fast enough. So, these are things you can think about. Anyway, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you beginners enjoyed this course, and I hope that this taught you how to support a base adequately at many, many, many different sizes. Anyway, thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate it as always. Please don't forget to hit that bell if you want notifications on our episodes. Definitely leave us some comments, and if you're not subscribed, please do so. We love the subscriptions to our channel. It definitely helps us out. Thanks again, all. See you soon.